Can you please call the hearing number for the record?
This is Commission hearing number 6 of 16 September 2019 in the case of 003 Daniel August, case 007 Angelin Labiche, case 006 Paul Michaud, case 001 Dorothy Chung Kim et al.
Thank you. Before we call the first witness, I'd just like to clarify two matters for the record. The first is to reiterate to witnesses that come before the Commission the prohibition against making allegations against someone at a public hearing where that person has not been given an opportunity to previously respond to that allegation. I'm sure we can all understand the reputational damage and distress that a person can suffer from being named in a public hearing, and we can understand that it's unfair to name a person who has not previously been given an opportunity to respond to that allegation. The second is to ask witnesses to be careful in their evidence to talk about what they know rather than rumours they have heard. While we're not bound by rules of evidence and hearsay evidence is admissible, we are trying to find the truth about the complaints made, and that process can be hindered if information being provided by witnesses is not information that they have a reasonable basis for knowing is true. Having made those comments, I would like to issue an apology on behalf of the Commission to the family of the late Antoine Charlette for distress that was caused to them by the testimony of Mr. Solona Savi on Tuesday, 10th of September, which could have been interpreted as implicating Mr. Antoine Charlette as a member of the coup d'etat. As that evidence was given in Creole, I will hand to my Vice Chair to issue the full apology on the behalf of the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Le nom Commission La Vérité, Réconciliation et l'Unité nationale, moi, je suis content exprime nos apologies envers la famille Antoine Charlette pour quelque chose qui nous a dit devant la Commission concernant une allégation qui participe dans le coup d'État le 5 juin. Cette allégation est faite par M. Solano Savi et la famille Charlette démentit cette allégation complètement. Encore une fois, le nom de la Commission, je présente nos excuses avec la famille Antoine Charlette. Merci.
Thank you. The other matter I wanted to raise was that on Friday, the 13th of September, we were discussing the Liberation Memorial Fund with Mr. Confay and the fact that there were additional beneficiaries to those originally named in the Liberation Memorial Act receiving benefits from that fund. After the hearing, Mr. Marcus Simon pointed out to the Commission that Section 4.3 of the Act provides that the fund is, quote, to provide for the maintenance, education, benefit, or advancement of such other persons as the Board of Trustees may nominate, close quote. So the Act does provide for the inclusion of additional beneficiaries other than those specifically named. So thank you, Mr. Simon, for that. Could you please call the first witness?
Mr. Bernard Georges.
I, Bernard Georges,
Shall swear to give the evidence
swear to give the evidence
which shall be true,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth,
and nothing but the
so
truth.
help me God.
So help me God.
Hello, Mr. Georges. The Commission is grateful to you for appearing as a witness today. The Commission has called you in relation to two complaints. Case 002, the case of Louis Betsy, and case 003, the case of Mr. Auguste. Both complainants were arrested at the pleasure of then President Awe Rene and for the security of the country. And the Commission is aware that during the period of the coup d'etat of 1977, persons were detained under Section 2 of the Preservation of Public Security Emergency Powers Regulation 1978, and would like to hear from you as an expert witness, given your extensive experience in that area. In addition, in relation to Mr. Auguste, the Commission understands that you were his lawyer that assisted him when he tried to get his property back, and the Commission would like to hear any relevant evidence you have with respect to that case and why Mr. Auguste was unsuccessful in those proceedings. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Shall I start with the detention issues first? Following the coup in 1977, there were occasional arrests and detentions of persons, very often supporters of the Mankam government, but not necessarily so, who were suspected of activities injurious to the security of the state. The arrests were not under penal legislation available to the government at the time or to the prosecuting authorities, but these were detentions at the President's pleasure, arrests and detentions occurring under an order signed by the President and naming the person who was to be arrested and detained. Each such group of arrests was made pursuant to regulations which were enacted through statutory instruments made in terms of the Preservation of Public Security Act, which was a colonial piece of legislation enacted, as we probably know, in many British colonial territories in the 1950s, with a view to controlling independence movements generally in Africa, but also in other UK territories. Seychelles was no exception. This legislation was there, and it was used periodically after the coup. So far as I can understand the law, every time that there was what the SI called a public emergency, or a situation in the country which warranted the passing of, or the enactment of an SI, the passing of an SI, because they were all statutory instruments made, of course, under the hand of the minister and not acts of parliament. An SI was promulgated. They were not all identical, but generally giving authority for the apprehension and detention of persons, amongst many other powers, sale of intoxicating liquor being one of them, and the freedom of movement, or curtailment of the freedom of movement, being another. Each of these SIs, whenever they were spent, was revoked. And when there was a necessity for another one, that was reenacted. They were not all identical, but they generally have the same basic structure. And it is Section 4.2 of the Act, if I'm not mistaken, or perhaps Regulation 4.2 of the regulations, which enabled detention of persons.
Can I So did there have to first be some declaration of a state of emergency before you could issue these types of orders?
May I quickly look at the law? I suspect that the answer is yes, because most of the regulations, and I don't have the 1978 and the 1979 regulations here with me. The prime one, of course, was SI 46 of 1978, which was the first detention of persons. But all the others were pretty much mirror images of that first one. And they all, unless I'm mistaken, speak of a public emergency or a situation in the country warranting the issuing of the statutory instrument. I'm looking here at SI number 110 of 1981, for instance, which was made in December 1981 following the mercenary attack. And they all start off with, in exercise of the powers conferred by Section 4.2 of the Preservation of Public Security Act. The President makes the following regulations. And very often they are preceded by a public security notice, as was the case in the one to which I refer. The notice in this particular case in 1981, which, as I say, has no relevance to the detentions of which we speak, starts off by saying, in exercise of the powers conferred by Sections 4.1 and 4.2 of the Preservation of Public Security Act, and being satisfied that the situation in Seychelles is so grave that the exercise of the powers conferred by Section 3 is inadequate to ensure the preservation of public security, the President makes the following notice. And he declares then the public emergency, pursuant to which he issues the preservation, or rather he issues the preservation of public security regulations. Some of them are under the hand of President René, others are under the hand of Minister Berlouis. I think the 78 one was, and if I'm not mistaken, under the hand of Minister Berlouis. And that, of course, then gives the power to detain. For ostensible or imagined acts prejudicial to the public safety.
So when you say imagined, so just if you thought someone looked like a threatening person, or someone who had you'd heard from someone else, they'd said something negative about the government, that would be a sufficient basis?
I wasn't privy, of course, to the President's mind when he made the order, but I think the facts speak for themselves. Given that there was no due process, we never knew what the reasons were for invoking the detention orders in the first place, or listing a number of people to be detained in the second place. But I think, as I say, if one looks back now at the people who were detained and who were never charged with any offense, I think one could very satisfactorily say that in many cases these were to discourage discussion, criticism, and as the French would say, pour encourager les autres, to ensure that people towed the line. I think that was the main reason. I'm also sure and certain that there were amongst those detained persons who were vociferous in their criticism of the coup and its aftermath. I doubt very much, but that is my personal view, that there were any serious attempts by anyone at overthrowing the government, although that was the conventional wisdom at the time for the detentions. I think it's fair to say that I returned to the country from my legal studies in September 1978. So I was not here for the 78 detentions, but I was here thereafter, and I was very much on the spot when the 1979 detentions occurred.
So there was the legal power to issue these orders deriving from the old Colonial Preservation of National Security Act. But most of the time, there was actually no basis for using that power. Maybe after the mercenary attack in 1981, but any other time. I mean, the curious thing for me is some of the people that were detained, they were not politically vocal. So how?
Well, you're absolutely right. Mr. René was a lawyer, and he was a stickler for procedure. He cloaked every action of his, including the coup, in the garment of legality. Every time that he did something, he ensured that he was covered by a law somewhere. The proof of the pudding is in the things about which we are now speaking. He always ensured that he invoked the colonial legislation to give him the power to do that, which he did. But you are absolutely right, Madam Chair, that most of the people who were detained posed no threat other than the fact that they probably were not happy with the coup. But that is also the case for many other people who are not detained.
Good morning, Mr. Bernard. Would you say that the reactivation of the Act was a reaction towards, in those days, there were a spirit of fear, but at the same time, there was a fear of a counter-coup. And anyone suspicious of action of counter-coup were detained by the government, by the president, so as to sort of prevent the counter-coup to happen.
Well, I think anybody who stages a coup must fear, by the very action of staging a coup, that there are those who don't like it and who might want to reverse it. I think that's an inevitable outcome of taking power by force. Whether the detention of persons in 1978, 1979 was justified is something for the Commission to decide. My own personal view is that possible insurrections and states of emergency were imagined or were cooked up simply to have the excuse to detain persons. And I think that was the prime example, was not to prevent an insurrection, because I don't think until the mercenary attack that there had been any counter coup or insurrection in the offing. I think the main reason for the detentions was to silence any opposition and to silence any possible opposition which had hitherto not manifested itself. I think that was the main reason, and of course to send to put some fear into the population. I think that is clearly that was one of the intentions, so that people would behave and toe the line.
Good morning, Mr. George.
Good morning, Mr. Purvis.
In the Act, was it Public Security Act?
Preservation of Public Security Act, yes.
Preservation of Public
Called
Security.
colloquially the Public Security Act.
Okay. Did it state anywhere how long people could be detained? Was
No.
there any?
No.
Oh.
No,
okay.
I think the detention was at the President's pleasure.
Okay.
It would have had to be.
Thank you.
Following from that question, there was I don't know whether if it was following the 1978 detentions or one of the 1979 detentions, there was a tribunal set up by the President, which was called something like the Detention Review Tribunal. I've not been able to find any legal basis for this, but I know it was set up, and it was chaired by Justice Lavoie-Pierre, L-A-V-O-I-P-I-E-R-R-E, who was a sometime Justice of the Court of Appeal, and I think also was a Supreme Court judge for a short while. You might have heard or read elsewhere that Judge André Sauzier, who was not the Chief Justice, but the senior judge of the Supreme Court at the time, was very vocal in his opposition to these detentions. And whether it was because of that or for other reasons, there was a detention review tribunal, and I use these words ill-advisedly. They might not have been called that, but there was a tribunal set up to look into the welfare of those who were detained. And I know that the tribunal met, if I'm not mistaken, once with some members, some persons who were detained, but then by the time it came to do anything else, the detention had lapsed and the people had been released.
I'm just curious, so you came back in 1978?
September 78, I took up a position in the Attorney General's chambers in September 78.
So you didn't fear yourself ever being arrested, or?
No.
No, you
No.
just...
No, I had completed my studies. It was time to come back, and I returned.
You were bonded to come back?
I was bonded. I was bonded to come back, yes, certainly. And I served a short while at the Attorney General's chambers, 9 months to be exact. And then I was posted at a new institution called the Law Center, which was a creation of the government to provide legal services to the needy. That was from the 1st of June 1979. So I was effectively, quote unquote, a private practitioner while still bonded to the government from the 1st of June 79.
But the center was set up by the government.
Oh, center was set up by the government, and it was directed at the time by the person who is today the president of the Court of Appeal, Francis McGregor. Francis McGregor and I worked in the first law center for a couple of years, and then a second law center was set up called the Francis Rachel Law Center, because it was on Francis Rachel Street where the National Library, the Cultural Center, stands today. And I was asked to direct that one, which I did for some 5 or 6 years. Acting completely independently of the government, notwithstanding the fact that this was a government institution. There was no pressure to act for or to desist from acting for persons.
But in those days, would you say that justice was fair for everybody in the Seychelles?
Well, the principal judge was Judge Sauzier, and I think that speaks for itself. He was the fairest man you could ever meet. So when cases came to court, and when cases came up before Judge Sauzier or Frank Wood, Judge Frank Wood, who was the puny judge at the time, everything was scrupulously fair. But to answer your question, one would have to say no. Justice was not. There was no fairness at the time because of these. Because some people never got to come before the court. To wit, everybody who was detained. Justice, I must confess, took a blow later on. After the 1979 Constitution, for instance, the Bill of Rights was removed. So there were no fundamental rights applicable. Many other laws were passed constraining the power of judges to act fairly. The Lands Acquisition Act being one, and I'm sure we will have the time, or you will have the opportunity to hear others speak about this particularly awful piece of legislation. So, as I said, the government did everything by the book. It passed laws, some of which were very restrictive, within which judges had to operate. So justice as we know it today, for instance, with a modern constitution and a full Bill of Rights, did not exist from 1979 for a few years. Certainly up until 1991, but in the 1979 years, immediately following the Constitution, fairness was lacking in many instances.
Mr. Georges, bonjour.
Bonjour.
The sacred principle of separation of powers, how can you describe it in the 1980s?
Well, in the late 1990s and the early 1980s, there was no separation of powers to speak of, because we were in a one-party system, which was inaugurated and officialized in the 1979 Constitution, which clearly said that Seychelles was a sovereign socialist republic, which was following a one-party system. So the party and the state were one and the same. The assembly, such as it was, and I mean no disrespect to many of my colleagues who served in the People's Assembly, was pro forma. It was a rubber stamp. And I say this with knowledge. In one particular case in which I was involved, the Assembly was convened post haste, over lunch, in order to undo a judgment of the court at 11 o'clock that very morning. And it happily did so unanimously.
And this was all at the direction of the president?
Clearly.
What the president wanted, the president got regardless?
What the president wanted, the president found a way of getting.
in a sort of legal way. under
Always in a legal way. He clothed everything that he did in the garment of legality. Except perhaps the coup.
But I think he even cloaked that, right? The country was taken over and he was asked to become the president.
Retrospectively, he did, with Proclamation number 1 and Proclamation number 2. In the first of which he said that he had been asked, and in the second of which he told a better truth.
On the same line, because we are continuing, you spoke about the mercenary attack. In your own opinion, could you consider that as a counter-coup or what?
Well, I think the facts again speak for themselves. It was inevitable, I think, that in the manner in which the country had changed hands in 1977, and in which it was governed thereafter with the crackdown on the opposition, the banning of newspapers and the then opposition party, the clamping down on freedom of speech, the exile of many people, the detention at the president's pleasure of others, the beginning of acquisition and redistribution of land, that at some point somebody would try to turn back the clock. So it didn't come as a surprise that there would be an attempt at removing the coup government from power and replacing it with something else.
Going back to your point about everything that was done was cloaked in the garment of legality, was that the case also for people who were advised to go into exile, that we've heard over the past week in a number of cases?
Well, there was no law there. And I think the president, because he was the fountain of everything that happened in the country at the time, must have concluded that he couldn't continue detaining people forever who were possible opponents of his, and he encouraged people to go, because it would be easier to have them out of the way than to have them here. So we must see the exile of persons, some of them following a period of detention. We will let you out if you will leave, was a famous offer at the time. There were other measures, of course. I say the compulsory acquisition of land, the prosecution of certain people for offenses such as sedition, whenever there was an underground paper which was circulating, which the president felt was not doing him justice. So I think he concluded that it would be best for those people who wanted to oppose him to leave. And as you heard, and as you will no doubt hear, several people were advised that it would be better if they left the country. I know there was quite a lot of that following the students' demonstration in 1979. A lot of youngsters who were, as youngsters are likely to be, more hot-headed than others, found themselves boarding planes to leave the country, some of them for very long periods of time. Encouraged by a word from State House, which was diffused through various methods. Generally, somebody would arrive to say, you know, the president likes you, but he doesn't think that he can protect you very much more. You know, perhaps you might think of going away.
I mean, who was the president implying he was protecting people from? Because it was, I mean, were people doing things, do you think, were people doing things independent from, like the People's Militia?
Not at all.
No,
it was a complete charade. It was a complete charade.
Charade.
It was a complete charade. It was the president. The president decided everything, and whatever the president wanted, the president got, generally. And in fact, the problem with all of that is the sheer arbitrariness of the system, and we lawyers hate arbitrariness with a passion. It is the antithesis of the rule of law. Some people who were encouraged to go, or were compulsorily acquired, or were detained, were people who never posed a threat. Many others who did were spared, and that, I think, is the terrible legacy of that period.
Mr. George, you spoke about the students' manifestation.
Yes.
It was the same time we had the zoning of sports, we have student manifestation, and though a lot of people would not agree with what was happening, the student manifestation was against the NYS.
The National Youth Service, yes.
And the zoning was against the flourishing of sports in the Seychelles. And it is a big surprise for somebody who would not know the history of Seychelles to learn that all those who were in opposition concerning the life of a student and the sports, most of them against were arrested and jailed and encouraged to exile. But these cases were used also for compulsory acquisition of land for the government. Would you say that there was a policy, a strategy by the government coming from the coup?
I think there were many strategies of government coming from the coup. I think there must have been in Mr. René a genuine desire to improve the lot of the people. I think we must recognize that. His methods, of course, are subject to criticism, and I do not accept for one moment that the coup and many of the things that he did afterwards justified his desire to improve the lot of the people. The problem arose, I think, from the fact that he directed from the top. This was not a democratic process. If he felt, because he was advised that zoning of sports was a good thing, then it was implemented with no discussion with people. So obviously, and the same thing for the NYS. Students in schools woke up one morning to be told that henceforth they would have to spend 2 years in a national youth service away from their parents. And of course there was opposition to that because it was a top-down decree with no consultation. or if there was any consultation, it was very limited consultation, and clearly people resented that. I remember sitting in this very room during the constitutional debate saying very much the same thing to a question put by a member of the panel as you have today, Bishop. I think that was the problem. The problem was not whether it was right or wrong, or whether it had been preordained. I think the coup was all about power, clearly. I mean, there's many reasons have subsequently been given as to why the coup happened. It happened because Mr. René was tired of being in opposition and he wanted to take power. He had perhaps very good ideas for the country, and I'll grant him that, but the method of getting to the position where he could bring them into operation was wrong, and I think must be criticized. Unfortunately, once you've shot the bullet, everything that you do thereafter is going to be tainted with that original illegality, and you are going to have to keep running the country with an iron hand, and this is where I think things did not go as he might have wanted, where there was resentment by the sports person to the zoning of sports, and I think the jury is still out today as to whether this was a good or a bad move. Only yesterday evening, I gave a lift to somebody from a function back home who was saying that it was the worst thing that could have happened to football because he was a footballer. I don't know. I'm not a sports person. But what I do know is that resentment came from the fact that there was no consultation and that there was an imposition of a new order from above. And of course, the first reaction of people is to oppose.
And then that opposition would lead to your detention, and then you'd be suggested it might be a good idea to leave thereafter.
Yes, detention, exile, expropriation of property, firing from work. Lots of people lost jobs. Revolutions are terrible things. They upset the status quo, and everybody suffers. In this particular case, I think the country lost a great deal in terms of the exiling of a lot of people who immediately after the independence could have contributed to the country. The detention, and you see, it wasn't only detention, but the moment you were detained, you were marked as an opponent, and that stayed with you. Some came out of it extremely well and did very well. Many others are still, as you have noticed and you will notice, traumatized 40 years later by what happened to them. I think the country lost considerably. And this is still my opinion, it is a personal opinion, but I know it is shared by many others, lost considerably. That bounds that independence should have given to the country was squandered by the hardness and harshness of the coup and its aftermath.
I think you mentioned something which has been a practice in the Seychelles for quite a long time now, when you said that those who were jailed were marked. So those who were jailed were known as those who are not with us. and those who are with the government will be the privileged one. They will have everything, and those who were opponents of the coup, their life were very miserable.
Well, I think that's true. The phrase "eknu pa eknu," with us and against us, entered into the vocabulary then, and divided the country significantly. It's a division that we are only today trying to heal. It had long-lasting effects. But worse than that, it wasn't all of the people who opposed who were targeted. It was only some of them, and that is where the arbitrariness creeps in and makes things even worse. And which is why some people today are still asking the question, why me? And that, I think, is one of the worst legacies of the coup, that there was no system, or the aftermath of the coup. There was no system. It was something that was built on the hoof.
Mr. George, because the mandate of the Commission, as you know very well, is reconciliation and national unity. And you have a vast experience of the life of Seychelles as a brilliant lawyer. Do you have some strategies to suggest to the Commission how we can arrive to our mandate? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't share your view that I'm a brilliant lawyer. I think I'm a lawyer. All lawyers are good. But I think that, if I may, with respect, say, I think your strategy of getting people to speak is going to be the winning strategy. A lot of people whose voices were not heard or were deliberately not heard because they were not here, or there was a deliberate attempt at ensuring that their voices were not heard. This commission gives an opportunity to those people to come forward, as we have seen in the few already who have deponed before you, to offload that baggage which has been weighing them down all those years. I think out of this conversation, if I may call it that, will come the recognition that the page needs to be turned, and we need to reconcile ourselves with each other, and cease dwelling in the past and look forward to a bright future. I think that is a winning strategy. I like to think that the future will define itself. The Commission is in early stages of work. A lot more will come out. I know that, and a lot of terrible things will be told. But I think the hope is that as people are able to offload that which they have kept sealed in for many years, a strategy for reconciliation will emerge. I am absolutely convinced that that will happen.
Maybe from yourself, Bernard, knowing that this commission has a mandate to bring truth, reconciliation, national unity, would you, as a lawyer, as a member of the National Assembly, as a citizen of Seychelles, encourage all the actors, the victims, the perpetrators to come to the commission and to bring the truth to the nation?
Absolutely and unreservedly. That was the whole purpose. Don't forget that the National Assembly was completely united. It was unanimous in deciding that this had to happen, the commission had to be set up, and that the time was now. So I think this opportunity, you see, if you'll allow me to say this, I think, or I have said for many years, that the whole history of Seychelles is one of missed opportunities. From the get-go, right at the start. Whenever we came to a fork in the road, we took the wrong path. And we don't need to go back, but independence and the coup and what happened afterwards, I think are examples of this. This is the time now, and this is the one opportunity that everybody has, not to miss this opportunity again. We've come to another fork in the road, and I think all the signs point to the correct path. And I encourage everybody. Victims will come. It's the perpetrators that we would like to see come forward, secure in the knowledge that if they make a clean breast of everything, nothing will happen to them, and that they will not be shunned, but they will be received by the community and by the nation with open arms. This is a call, I think, that we need to repeatedly make. And for those people who are listening to me today, if there are any, this is a call that I make directly to them. This is the opportunity. It's not going to come around again. Let's seize it and move forward.
Thank you.
Ask about, so in relation to Mr. August, so he was unlawfully detained, left the country, came back and tried to get his property back. You represented him in his proceedings, and he was unsuccessful in those proceedings. We heard evidence last week from Mr. Dauphin, which seemed to suggest that the president had intervened with respect to his property and given a directive that it should stay with the lady that he left it in the care of. I'm just sort of, I was thinking about it, whether that would impact a judicial determination as to his case at that time, or whether you think he lost that case because he didn't have a case.
Oh, no, I don't think he lost the case because he didn't have a case. And it's not only because I was his lawyer. I think the judgment, the outcome was unfair. As to whether there was any directive from State House to the courts, I think not. But I do think, and I'm on record as saying this already, and I will repeat it again, that there was a time here when State House did not need to call the court. The court knew what was expected of it and delivered accordingly. And I think this is another example here, not of the court necessarily being unfair, but of the law under which the case had to be judged being unfair and constraining the court in what it did. And I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that the outcome was unfair because there were certain things that the court closed its eyes to. And whatever the merits or demerits of the case, I think the fact that the person who was in the house was encouraged to buy it, or was maybe not encouraged, but was permitted to buy it, and was granted a mortgage, a loan with a mortgage from the same organization which had repossessed the property from Mr. August, was an element which the court closed its eyes to, and had it considered it, its judgment must have been different. Because we're talking here of effectively de minimis arrears in the scheme of things. It just so happened that there was a rigid law, the People's Housing Mortgages Act, and that law was rigidly applied, and again, with a number of missed opportunities along the line for due process to have happened. The fact that Mr. Auguste was not officially informed of the process, I think fatally flaws the outcome. And we cannot be heard to say, or nobody can be heard to say, that service on the curator of vacant estates, who did not then look for Mr. Auguste, as I understand things, or that the lady in the house knew and informed her sister, Mr. Auguste's wife, those are not sufficient. I think I don't think, I state that there was an obligation on the Housing Corporation before it went to the extent of repossessing somebody's property, even if that person was in arrears, which is of course a matter of contention. That was insufficient, in my view, to lead to a repossession. You cannot lose your property without knowing that you're about to use it and being given an opportunity of opposing it. And there is absolutely no proof of service in this matter on him.
Oh, the curator told us that under the Act he just had to send a letter to his last known address, which would have been his address where he was living prior to him going into exile. I mean, the arrears, troubled us because it's like 30,000 of arrears. The claim is those arrears were there a month after he left, but it's like 3 years of non-payment. And it seemed odd to us that he wouldn't have received earlier notification of that, yet a notification of 30,000 worth of arrears comes a month or so after he's left.
Yes. I think in fairness to the Housing Corporation, we must say that if there is a loan of 102,000 rupees made in 1981, and in 1991 that loan is still at 100,000 rupees, that action might have been necessary. And I'm not saying here that it's Mr. Auguste or the person he put in the house who are responsible, but looking at it from the SHDC's perspective, clearly, if a loan has not moved over that period of time, this is something that can lead to action being taken. But you've got to look at the specificities of this particular case. This was a person who borrowed money, who had been detained, who was forced to go into exile, or who voluntarily went into exile because of his previous detention, who was in arrears but had organized with the Housing Corporation for a reduced repayment schedule or a reduced repayment loan, had obtained the permission to put somebody in the house who would pay an increased sum in order to further reduce the loan. All of these things have to be considered. You cannot make abstraction of these things. And of course, you cannot make abstraction of the fact that the person who was in the house subsequently purchased it. I think when you put all of these factors into the balance, speaking as a lawyer, the outcome is clear, and it cannot be that you will lose your property without due process. As for the curator of vacant estates, well, he might be right. But there again, I think whether the law says that this is all you need to do, when it comes to adjudicating, when the judge comes to be making a decision to repossess a person's property, I think it behoves the judge to ensure that the person who's going to lose his property has been given every opportunity to be present before the court and to present his defense, which of course was completely lacking in this case.
There's something very specific about this case, is that in September 87, when Mr. Auguste left the country, we are told by Mr. Dauphy, who was with the Ministry for Housing, that although he had been in default for 2 months, he was back on par. There is also evidence that his wife, who stayed behind, made the payment for the month of October, and also evidence that the lady who was staying in the house made payments during 1 or 2 months. And subsequent to that, in May 88, Mr. Auguste is assessed with arrears of 30,000, which basically would have been 30,000 for 3 months.
Yes, I have the file here, and in preparation for today I went through the file to try and see whether there was, what the situation of arrears was. I have a statement here of the arrears as at 1987, and they do not amount to 30,000 rupees. If you'd like to know what they amount to, I can verify if you give me permission to look at the papers. I have an SHDC detailed statement here, which for some reason doesn't coincide with any of the other figures. But we see here that in 1985, at the end of 1985, there were 10,700 rupees of arrears. I'm sorry, as at 31st of December 1986, there were 10,000 rupees of arrears. Less amounts received in 1986 and in 87, the arrears went down to 8,700. And then remained relatively constant thereafter, until in 1991, where only 2,600 rupees had been received in the year 1990 and 1,200 in the year 1991, the arrears stood at 15,900, say 16,000 rupees. So at repossession, there was 16,000 rupees of arrears, as against a finding by the judge that the lady in the house had paid 28,800 over the period that she had occupied it. And clearly, if payments had been made in 1990 and 1991 at 900 rupees a month, there would have been no arrears in 1991. And if they had been made at 500 rupees, there would have been significantly lower arrears.
Mr. Dauphé's evidence was that Mr. Auguste lost his house because the lady that was living in it didn't make the payments. In your view, would that be a correct statement? Based on all those papers you've got there.
Well, all I can say is this. When I filed a case for Mr. Auguste in 1992, I filed it against the lady, her companion, and the Housing Corporation as the third defendant. And our allegations there were, first of all, that they stopped payments to prompt repossession. Secondly, that the lady did not advise, neither the lady nor the Housing Corporation advised Mr. Auguste that repayments had stopped. And the averments, the tortious averments that we made against them were, first of all, that payments were deliberately stopped to provoke the repossession. There was a fault in not informing Mr. Auguste. There was a fault in not ensuring that he was adequately represented in the repossession case. That the sale of the parcel and the house to the lady clearly underlined or underpinned the notion that she had a motive to have provoked the repossession, and that the Housing Corporation failed to inquire or alert itself as to that probable motive at the time of offering the property to the lady. And therefore we said, we argued that the repossession was improper, illegal, and unfair, based on wrong premises. And if the repossession had been fair, then the sale to the lady and her partner was improper. Those were the allegations that we made, and I must rest on these because these were the allegations made on instructions. We failed. We failed on every one of these grounds.
So you didn't put forward the evidence that Mr. Dauphy gave us that the President rang and said the lady shall have the house?
No.
No.
No, that was not part of it. Mr. Dauphy was a witness. We called him as a witness. But he was a witness to the extent that payments had been made.
Right. Okay. Okay. Oh.
We did, of course, following this. This case took a while in the court because the Housing Corporation was non-suited, because it was the judge found that it was a public officer, so therefore subject to a prescription period of 6 months as opposed to 5 years. We appealed that point, won. It came back for a rehearing, but the judge gave the same conclusion. We sought leave to appeal that decision, but leave was not granted. I then wrote, on behalf of Mr. Auguste, to the government and to the minister who was in charge of SHDC at the time, making representations and seeking a redressing of the situation, but in common with numerous letters written to that particular ministry at the time, there was no satisfactory solution found. We then sought fast tracking of purchase of another land bank property from the government, but were told that it would be considered in the same manner as other applications for land under the land bank project, which is a euphemism for get lost.
Mr. George, I think after all you have been presenting with your file well detailed, and what Mr. Duffy told us last week, I found the whole process useless, despite your early report, because one call for nullified the whole process. According to Mr. Duffy, he was told the lady must get the parcel. So for me, you made a great effort for nothing.
Sadly so. Unfortunately, that is sometimes the way the law operates. We were in court for half a decade, various courts, producing a lot of evidence. But I think ultimately, this is an issue of fairness. The People's Housing Mortgages Act was passed in order to fast-track repossessions of properties subject to a mortgage by the SHDC, because the normal method of foreclosure is antiquated and takes a long time. So, to that extent, the law was progressive. Essentially, if you lend money from the public purse to people, you've got to ensure that that money is repaid in an appropriate way, and if it is not, that you repossess the property and give it to somebody else. To that extent, the law is, as I say, progressive and subject to no criticism. It is in the manner in which it is applied, of course, as with many things, that I find fault. If somebody is not in the country, and his sister-in-law is living in the house with his permission, and you make an application for repossession, which you serve on the curator of vacant estates, my legal mind tells me that you cannot repossess until you have made sure that the person who's going to lose his house knows of the repossession. Basic due process. Worse, if having repossessed, you then sell it to the person who is in the house, who has not paid rent, who has not paid the loan for a couple of years, and you don't see the red flag that is raised in consequence, then there's something, in my view, terribly wrong with you. And then those are the two instances of, I think, the failure of due process and the unfairness to Mr. Auguste. Unfortunately, the court was only concerned with, were there arrears? Answer yes. Has he been served appropriately through the curator of vacant estates? Answer yes. Therefore, repossession ordered, QED. Major failure of justice and fairness.
The curator of vacant estates, how long does or did he have to take responsibility for this vacant estate? But is there a period of time that the curator can spend to find the person, to make sure that
Worse
they know.
than that. Worse than that. You see, the curator of vacant estates is a very important position, and it is the equivalent of the public trustee in common law jurisdictions. Unfortunately, in our country, the curator of vacant estates is the same person as the registrar general, who's also the land registrar, who's also the registrar of deeds, who's also the registrar of copyrights and the registrar of trademarks and the registrar of companies, and various others. And in that list, and the stamp duty commissioner, and in that list, of course, the last and most minor of all the hats that that person wears has always been the hat of curator, when it should have been one of the most important hats, because you're dealing here with vacant estates. You're dealing here with people's properties who are not here. And the Curatelle Act is a very old, very ancient act, which imposes great duties, two of which are, number one, under Section 10, whenever a curator is appointed to do something, that curator must go to the court to seek a vesting order, vesting the property or the succession or the rights to the property in the curator. That is what gives the curator power to act. And I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of the duty of the curator under the People's Housing Mortgages Act, but I suspect it must be more than simply writing a letter to the last known address. And I'm not criticizing the curator at all here, because I don't know what the curator did or did not do in this case. The other duty of the curator under Section 22 of the Act, of the Curatelle Act, is to act in a manner that will protect the rights to property or to the succession or to the vacant estate of the person in whom or from whom the rights are vested into the curator. And I think those provisions speak for themselves, that the curator must, by virtue of his or her appointment, have a very great obligation to ensure that the rights of the person that they are representing are protected at all times. And the best way of doing that, of course, is to get in touch with the person. Mr. Auguste had not disappeared into the universe. He was in England, and it would have been an easy matter to find his address and to apprise him of the fact that he stood to lose his property because there was a repossession order being sought. And if at the end of the day the law was such that the property would still be lost because there were arrears and there was no discretion, well then so be it. But the failure of due process, in my view, taints this whole process with unfairness and illegality.
In fact, to conclude what you are saying, Mr. Auguste said during that time his sister-in-law visited them in the UK.
Yes.
So the curator should have tried at least, if he wanted at that time to have any last known address, to investigate.
Yes, it's of course very easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to say how people should have acted at a particular occurrence. But looking at this thing objectively, I must conclude that there ought to have been more effort made in ensuring that Mr. Auguste was aware that he stood to lose his property. And if, as has been said, because I have the proceedings here of the case, if, as has been said, he told his sister-in-law, let them take it, well then, that's okay. But he ought to have been officially informed of the process.
Unless it is part of a strategy. To disown people.
Unless it is part of the strategy to disown people, absolutely. Yes, yes. I don't know enough of the background to the case, but what I do know is that even if there had been no such strategy, and that this was a strategy to take the property away from Mr. Auguste, who in any event was perceived to be a member of the opposition, had gone into exile, and why should he benefit from a government loan? The process of taking his property away from him is fundamentally, in my view, flawed. And that's not, I mean, the worst thing about this is that all of this occurred in 1991 onwards, when we had shed the one-party state and were in the process of embracing a new multi-party system of democratic government. But there you go, those are the vestiges of the coup, who are still with us today.
Can I just ask, so in 1991 then, would the president no longer have the final say in everything like he had for all those years because you were moving to a multi-party state? Would his authority be reduced at all?
Not at all.
No.
The president, even post-1993, still maintained a very strong hand of authority on everything. He had to share that authority with other institutions from 1993 on, but he still was very much the person who sat at the top of the pyramid.
So if he wanted something, he would get it his way?
There were very few people in the country who could stand up to him. It did happen. Occasionally the courts did rule against the government. But he was everybody knew what he wanted, and to the extent that it was possible to deliver, I think that happened.
It's just extraordinary to me. Like, totally, that everybody knew what he wanted. So regardless of any directive, they would implement because they wanted to please him or because they were afraid.
Well, I think fear had left, or fear had greatly diminished. It was more, yes, pleasing, ensuring that things were done in a manner that would not antagonize the directives.
And could one also say maybe in the hope of personal gain?
I'm sure. I'm sure that in certain cases this was the motive. Madam Chair, I know it sounds odd, but you got to live in the time for you to know. There's a lot of these things were incremental. If they all happened at once, there would be an uproar. But if the belt tightens gradually over time, you accommodate, I think, losses of personal freedom because it's just not worth fighting it, and it's easier to go along with the system. And I think there was a lot of that at all levels, and I think we must recognize this, that the stain of the coup and its aftermath invaded the whole of society. And we are, in any event, as a nation, generally peaceful people. You will see a lot. You will see a lot of examples of what I've just said in the compulsory acquisition sphere, and I'm happy to come back and talk to you about those, should you wish, because I have some experience of that. But you will see a lot more of what I've just spoken about in that field. A lot of personal preferences, a lot of personal animosity.
I'm sure we would love to have you come back. It's been illuminating for me, a lot of what you've said, so thank you very much, particularly in relation to the laws, but also, you know, the ambience, as the bishop would say, during the time. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and we will no doubt call upon you again, given your long experience here, even though you look very young, so I'm sort of surprised that you were around in the time. But
You're incredibly kind. I should be very happy to return whenever you want me back.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
We will adjourn now for 15 minutes, and come back. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, in relation to your case, Mr. Betsy, we were just looking at detention orders more broadly, getting evidence on detention orders. Was there something specific?
Okay, no problem.
In relation to Mr. Betsy's land, could you speak to that?
The only thing I know is that I heard Mrs. Betsy, when she testified, saying that she had come to me to make an application restraining any further dealings with their land while they were in negotiations with the government. I'm afraid I've not been able to trace the document in question, but what I can say is this is absolutely the thing that that I would have been asked to do and that I would have done. I suspect it would have been some sort of application for a restraining order, a restriction, or a caution, or some such.
I remember seeing it, and I'm sorry, Mr. Betsy, for having forgotten the issue. She had asked you to file this, but it actually had no impact, right? So
Yeah, that is what
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. It was a caution.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's probably a yes.
Yeah, here it is here. Alex, could you just show this to Mr. Georges?
Thank you.
I mean, prior to filing that, would you have done a search to see if that land had already been transferred into somebody else's name?
I would have. This was not. This document was not prepared by me, but it was certainly signed before me by Mrs. Betsy, as in my capacity as notary. This document would have been prepared somewhere else, and I would have simply been the person attesting to her signature, which explains why. Which explains why I don't have a copy of the document.
Right. And the other document, the lands registration document there,
Yes.
does that show that the land was already transferred before the caution was filed?
The caution is dated the 15th of April 1994. This document here, showing a transfer to Mr. Monti, is dated the 6th of April, and it was registered it was presented on the 11th of April and registered on that day. So the document of the 15th of April 94, which was attested to by Mrs. Betsy in front of me, would have post-dated the registration of this one, so it would not have been registered.
And normally, I guess it took them a while at the lands registry to have the files in order, I presume.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
everything that is registered, or every document that is presented for registration, is usually presented with entered with either a clock date stamp, which is a round one, or it is a date and time of presentation is written at the bottom in pencil, so that documents are dealt with in chronological order. And if this were to have arrived, as I suspect it did, after the instrument of transfer to Mr. Monti, it would have gone in the queue. And by the time it came to be processed, that one would have already been dealt with. So this one would be returned, because by then it would have been OTOs. Had Mrs. Betsy got in before the 11th of April, her document would have been dealt with first, and the instrument of transfer to Mr. Monti would have been stood down and could not have been registered. Simply looking at the dates, 11th of April registered here, so this one would not have applied. So yes, I can speak to that, and I can certainly say that this document was prepared, and I attested the signature of Mrs. Betsy, who would have appeared before me at the time to do so, and then she would have gone immediately afterwards to the registry of the court to swear the attached affidavit. But by the time, unfortunately, she brought it to the registry, the deed had been done. And what you may have to consider, if you permit me, is the representations made to Mrs. Betsy at the time, and the effect of the transfer clearly at a time when they knew that she was going to take steps to prevent the transfer. I think that is the issue with respect, which is before you.
Just a few days, if she'd been a few days, a few days ahead, she might have a different story.
That unfortunately is the fate that has befallen many people in this country.
Okay, my apologies to you, Mr. Betsy, for reminding me. Thank you for reminding me. No, don't apologise at all. No. No, it was good to get that cleared up. I admit I'd forgotten, you know, there's running all these different cases. We will now adjourn for 15 minutes and come back at 11:21. How's that? Okay. Thank you again. Thank you very much. You've been very helpful. I have no doubt that we will be calling you again. So I very appreciate you coming forward, and thank you for your call to witnesses and perpetrators. You know, we really want to receive some perpetrators before us. Reconciliation involves two sides.
Absolutely.
So thank you again. Thank you. Bye.
All rise. Okay, you're free to go.
Can you please call the hearing number for the record?
This is Commission hearing number 6 of 16 September 2019 in the case of 003 Daniel August, case 007 Angelin Labiche, case 006 Paul Michaud, case 001 Dorothy Shankim et al.
Thank you. Can you call the first witness, please?
Angelin Labiche.
I, Angelin Labiche, swear
That I shall give the evidence
that I shall give the evidence
to the truth and
to the truth,
the truth, the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Swear he's a different religion. Yeah. Yeah, he's an Adventist. Thank you, Mr. Labiche. So you are the complainant in this case, and your case number is 007. And your case, I think, primarily turns on abuse in the army and abuse by the army. The commission asked that you set out the details of your complaint before it. If you find it difficult and you want to break at any time, please let us know. We are due to adjourn at 12 o'clock today, so we may have to call you back after the lunchtime adjournment if you haven't finished with giving the evidence of your complaint. So please go ahead, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, I want to start in the beginning of my youth first. Maybe at the end you will understand why. So,
Oh, if you prefer Creole, you can use it.
yeah. So after the NYS, I went to work at Koichivi as in the agricultural field. So my job was mostly agriculture. And in 1986, I decided to enter the army. My family was very poor, and so I had to do something for my family. So I entered the army on the 1st August 1986. And there I was a recruit, trained at Barbaron, en Spolite. And after that, I was sent to the Exile to train as a commandos. There at the Exile, I was put on a farm where they were working with pigs and other animals. And after that, I was sent to the exile camp where I started the training. So,
I'm curious. So you were recruited by the army and then sent to work on a farm?
yeah, firstly at the Barbaron, it was a farm. We were there on a farm. We were planting. There were animals like cow, pig, broilers, layers. That's what we do at the Spolite, and most of the soldiers were sent there to work on a farm.
And was that a farm for the people, feeding the people, or?
I remember all the vegetation that was collected at Barbaron was sold to the SMB at the time, which is today the STC. And the animals were sent to to be slain for meat, but not at Barbaron. And there were the eggs that was collected, and those were sent to all these things were to sell to the SMB and other places. So
To whose account was it sold?
The
When it
car-
was sold to SMB, who did SMB pay to?
This is what maybe the commission will maybe search for that, but I heard it was for Givarini, but I don't know.
For whom?
For the Givarini. This is what I heard, but I don't know. But the thing is, we were working on the farm, and all of these things were sold. We were being paid by the army. It's like this.
So you're saying maybe the farm belonged to Mrs. Jeva.
Yeah, that's the commission. Maybe if you search for it, maybe people will come and they will say for whom is it.
Thank you.
But I don't think it was for the army.
But this was the farm at Exile or the farm at Baba?
The two farms. There was one at Babawa, Ospolit, and the other was at
L'Exile.
L'Exile. So, okay. I've been working as a commandos. My number there was 3104 as my number as a soldier. So I have worked for quite a while, about 2 years after an incident happened. I was sent to work where they say Grand Collège. Grand Collège is now the house of the ex-president, Mr. James Saylor, and at Sasusi. And there was what we say bomb of 40 barrel. And we came there as security to make sure no one comes to the place. So there was a lieutenant. He was working as a carpenter on the site where I was like we say, sentry. And he told me to call the operator to tell them that at 4 for him to get a lift because he was living at Barbaron, so that the transport can pass by and take him to go to Barbaron. So the person working, it was Mr. Charlotte. He was, one of his feet was cut, and he works only in the day. That means 8 to 4. So I passed the message to Mr. Charlotte.
Excuse me, would you know the first name of this Mr. Charlotte?
This is what I do not, maybe I will search for it, but I don't remember his name.
And you say he had one leg amputated?
Yeah, amputated, yeah. Maybe I have in the file, but I have to search for it.
Just a clarification, the Lieutenant Charlotte, he was...
No, Charlotte was not a lieutenant. He was a worker at in the operator.
He was the operator.
He was the operator.
Okay.
And
he was the one with one leg.
You want me to mention the name of the lieutenant? It was Georges Camille.
Of the name of the lieutenant?
You will see that it is, everything started with him that I'm going to present to the commission. It's where my problem started.
For the record, I'd like it noted that Mr. Camille has been informed that he was going to be named and has given a written response to the allegation. You can carry on.
Okay. So, after reporting the information to Mr. Charlotte at the operator, one thing Mr. Charlotte told me, because I was an operator too at that time, and we were a little bit like friends. So he told me that you don't know that I am going off duty, and I told him that you know how we work. When you go off duty, you need to take the information, give to the one that is coming back. So Mr. Charlotte told me that I don't know how to say this word because because it's something that is, he's going to make sex with my sister. This was what Charlotte told me on the radio. And the only answer I said was, I can give you the number, I can give you the address because my sister is living in Italy. And Mr. Lieutenant, he heard the conversation. So when I arrived at the main camp, because the place where I am, I was not on the main camp. When I arrived at the main camp after work, I was told that I was talking things that we do not talk on the radio. So when I was going on my pass that day.
I mean, can I ask you a question? Just a clarification.
Yeah.
When you got the message from Mr. Kami, you didn't go physically to the receptionist. You have the conversation on radio. You informed him on radio.
Yeah, because we were far from. Yeah, there is the main camp, and the Grand College is far from the operator. So this conversation was on radio. So every 3 days we get a pass, and that day I went to scout for the president because as commandos we scout the president every day. So I went to scout, and in the afternoon when they brought the food for the soldiers at State House, they take the people that is going on pass back to the camp, and another group comes down. So my sergeant, which was Mr. Emmanuel Larry, and now I think he's Lieutenant Colonel, something like that, told me that I have to stay at State House because I don't have a pass. So I asked why. I told him that I need to know why. So I'm coming to the camp to see what is the problem that I don't have a pass. So I came back from scout to the camp with a group of people, and Mr. Kami was standing near the armory. And I tried to ask him, what is the problem that I don't have a pass? He said that there was conversation on the radio that was, we were not supposed to say these things on the radio. So I asked him, but how can you take my pass without having a judgment of the situation? Because it was Mr. Charlotte and me. So I asked Mr. Kami, do you have a personal problem with me? Firstly, I removed my gun, put it on the table, the pack of ammunition, put it on the table, and I told him, if you have any problem with me, you come and deal with that problem. Because I was being punished for nothing. So I think there is something wrong with that. So I was taken on the farm, put in the custody behind bars, and for the record, if you want, the custody itself, can I stand? It was at about that height, and like a box, like a little bit, it's smaller than a pig, where a pig is being put, it is smaller. So,
Can I just ask, was that a normal place that they had, or they just put you there?
Yeah.
People didn't normally go there, or they'd put people in that?
they put people in that. The minute if there is something like you have done something wrong, you are being put in that, how can I say that, dungeon? I don't know, because people cannot stand, even cannot sleep, but you there like being.
But was it an actual, like, little jail cell? Was it outside, inside?
Yeah, it was outside.
Outside, just a box.
Just there were three of them, three of the like a box.
With a what?
Of concrete, and in front there was the iron door.
And this was on the farm at Exile?
At Exile. We say normally we say low farm. The place we say low farm.
And were these?
To correct you, it is not at Exile, it is at Sans-Souci. Exile is on the top, and the farm is down below. Huh?
And were these 3 boxes, cement boxes with a steel door, were they actually designed to be and put there for misbehaving people, or were they used for some other purpose and you just happened to go in there, or were they deliberately made to put people in, or?
Because before me, many people has been put in that hole. Many other soldiers, and it was there was on the side where the pigs are being breed there, and you are just there smelling all the smell that comes from the pig. And the place was on top of the Warsaw Dam. You can see the Warsaw Dam downstairs. I don't know if the things coming from the pig goes to the dam. I don't know.
So did it have windows or bars, or it was a fully enclosed box?
No, it was closed. Only a place that they can look at you inside.
Like a typical little prison door? A little door that would open, or? Okay, thank you.
And how long you stayed in that box?
That it was. I stayed in that box for 5 days.
Without eating, drinking, or what?
No, you get something to drink, you get something to eat, but the place, a small thing like that, it is very hot. It is hot, the smell that comes from inside, it's like you are in a dungeon.
And if I understand correctly, the reason you were put in the box is because you said something inappropriate over the radio, and then you questioned your pass being removed, and that is why they put you in the box.
To correct this is, I don't think I have said something wrong, but I have answered what Mr. Charlotte was trying to tell me.
Your pass was refused at State House.
Yeah.
You mean
I
State
was
House
told.
here?
I was told there.
You were there.
Yeah.
You were going to Exile.
I was going back to Exile to give back the rifle and the
Ammunitions.
ammunitions so that I can put my own clothing to go on a pass.
Okay. The pass is for you to
visit my
have a
family.
break. To have a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
When you say you took your gun off and your ammunition and put it on the table, and you said to the lieutenant, if he has a problem with you, to come and settle it, can I take that as an invitation to come and fight it out?
Why is it that you are taking my pass for nothing? So if you have a personal thing, come do it.
Was there generally a procedure for revoking a pass? Would you have a hearing or anything like that, or was it someone more senior could revoke your pass at any time if they thought it was warranted?
They abuse their power. Only they take your pass without a judgment. And you know how everything should be. Everything should have a judgment first. Then we'll see who is the victim and who is the perpetrator.
So in a normal circumstance, if your superior wanted to revoke your pass, there had to be a process that he followed before he could do that?
Yeah, there is a process you have to go. Normally you go to the you are said to write a statement. The statement, you goes in front of the colonel. It could be Colonel Bob at that time, or Colonel Vidot, who was the camp, was the person in charge of the camp.
So the camp was actually situated on a farm? Is
The
that
camp? No, there is one thing. There is the camp, with where the president was living. This is the place where the president was living. Was the Exile camp. And below at Sasusi, there is the farm that there was a pig, the breeding pig.
So the farm was at Sans Souci. You mean Grand Collège?
Now, Grand Collège is the place where the ex-president has built his second house. And below, you reach the Grand Collège.
So there are four places you are saying: l'Exile, Barbaron, Grand Collège, and a farm where pigs were.
Yeah.
Okay. Four places, huh?
And where the president was living, he wasn't living in an army barrack.
It was an army barrack because in front there was the PMU who was security, and inside you will the commandos take on the first station, and you reach the house of the president, and all around there is where the soldiers live.
So the president lived in a house surrounded by soldiers.
Surrounded by soldiers.
In barracks.
Yeah.
Okay. How many soldiers?
You know, at that time, it could be at about 85 to 90 soldiers.
All armed?
We were fully armed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even where we go everywhere in town, if we are patrolling, we heavily armed. Not like the infantry; they do not put any bullet in their guns. Only on the side of the side of the gun.
So, as a commando, would it be fair to say your job was to guard the president and farm the farm?
Their job was to guard the president. But you need that when after that there is other little works like before going on your pass, you have to wake up at 4 in the morning. You have to go and look for grass. You have to cut 4 packed of grass to give to the pigs and to the cow. That was our job before going on a pass.
Monsieur Angelin, as a commando, where were you trained and how long your training took?
I've trained at the Exile, and my first training was for 3 months that we did the full course training in the commandos area. And, every day, every time we come from our pass, we go also in training. That means every 3 days, we are, after being a graduate as a soldier, every 3 days we are training in different kinds of training, parachute and everything.
As were expats or local people?
At the moment, the training officer was Bob. Bob was the head of, Bob the one who had the restaurant at Belaza last UN. He died a time ago. And
was he not one of the mercenaries?
Yeah, he was one of the mercenaries. Yeah, he came here in Seychelles, I think, doing the scuba diving at the Bovalo. And after that, he worked with the military. I trained with him, and there was some Seychellois who had been trained before me, who also was there in the training.
And those that were training you, where had they been trained before? In Seychelles or in another country?
For me at that time, when I started the commandos, it was 1986. So before that, I knew nothing about the camp. So it could be that some has had some training at maybe foreign countries, but like we are doing now. At the moment, there are many soldiers that goes abroad. In India, they go for other training. Mm-hmm. But we as commandos, we had a format of training. There was a format of training, and if you pass, you have to pass the training so that you can get the the commando sign on your uniform. And another, to finish the training, to get the cap, it's another phase of training to be sure that you are qualified as a commando. And I was a commando with the knowledge for the operator, and that's it.
And was it like prestigious to be a commando?
You feel proud when you're in a uniform of a commando.
Yet you tell us you had to do what I think long ago in Creole was called a corvée. You had to wake up early morning, go and get paquet
Yeah.
which was not really part of your work.
No, because I didn't sign for that, maybe.
Okay.
Even to go and clean the pigs, which I think it is not for the army.
Mr. Labiche, I think you said you were trained as a commando in 1986.
1986.
Was it prior for you to join the army? Because you joined the army on the 1st of August 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So you were commander before joining the army?
1986, sorry. 86.
When did you join the army?
86.
86.
1986.
1986. Thank you.
So your evidence is that you stayed in that cement box with a steel door for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were you told why you were going, were you told you're now going to go in this box for 5 days?
No, I was just sent there.
And how did you go there? Were you taken forcefully there, or you walked there and got in the box? Or
They put me in the Pingawas. It was a jeep. They brought me there, put me in the hole.
Monsieur Angelin, in your statement here, there's a mention of drugs. Can you elaborate a little bit, please?
Yeah, before, the thing is, we are still at Exile now. We had to jump to the other back to Aspolit. But what before going to that, I want to specify something. While I was in behind bars in the hall, I was thinking, why am I there? Only for saying something on a radio. But nobody take notice about what did happen when I was working at the camp. It happened one day that we were running the morning exercise to the mission lodge every morning before starting the training. We have to run, keep the body fit. And there at the Salazi Road, there was a jeep, a green, yellow jeep. And we continue. We saw a foreigner on top taking photos. We continue our road back to the camp. The next 3 days, we came by again. We saw the same thing going on, the jeep at the Salazi. But the thing is, when we come back from Mission Lodge, we do not see the person. And that striking my mind to say there is something wrong. So I reported that to the officers that the person was, they went to arrest the person, and the person, they deported him because they thought that he was trying to take up the photos of the soldiers and the positions of the Exile defense position. So for me, I think that sitting there in a hole, I should have had a medal of honor for what I have done. I have prevented maybe a coup at the Exile camp. And maybe, I don't know if it was for the president itself, but it was because I told them that there is something wrong, and that's when they took action. So you see, you were sitting in a cell with, how can I say that? You haven't done anything wrong.
So you saw the foreigner taking the pictures, you reported it. I mean, was there a sense among the commandos that there could be a coup at any time, and your role was really to protect against that happening?
At that time, the country was under a lot of, pressure. There was, if I can say that in public today, if the Seychelles people could sleep well, thanks to the people that was armed every night, going around north to south and everywhere at the time. We were the one who was on the road, making sure that each of you, even the president and everyone, is being, they can have a good dream.
Because, I mean, in some of our complaints that we will hear, a lot of people allege that they were abused by the army and they were very fearful of the army.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was that your experience, that sometimes civilians were targeted and attacked by the army?
Yeah. At the time that I was as a commander, we haven't had any time that we had neither problems with the public, but mostly when there is a situation that happens, we counsel them to go home. But I don't know, but not in the time that I was working. We as soldiers, as commandos, we were there to prevent. Yeah? We were there to prevent that something could happen. This was our purpose of work that we were doing.
As a commando, according to your views, were you protecting the regime or you were protecting the people of Seychelles?
Yeah, this is a good question. Maybe I think I was protecting the people, but I was protecting the regime. It could be. It is like that. You are putting there to do some work that is for the country, but in other way, it was for the system.
Were you at Exile at the time when Hoffman and Elizabeth were killed?
No. I heard something about it, but I was not at that time. I was not there at that time. At the Exile, like I say sometimes, there is the system, and there is the dog of the system. So if you are part of the dog of the system, So you are being used to do dirty work. But I was not part of the dogs of the system.
You are very well informed, Monsieur Angelin. Can you explain what is the dog of the system, please?
You are being used to do dirty work for them.
Like what?
I don't know. I cannot say anything about that because I will be incriminating myself that I have not seen anything, but you heard thing has happened. But
And when you say for they or for them, who is that you're doing the dirty work for? Who were these dogs of the system doing dirty work for?
it was some soldiers that was used, but I cannot mention that because I don't know anything about it.
But the soldiers were used by the president, or?
You know, this information I cannot get it because I was not in it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
you know, they are very secrecy in what they do.
But okay, so these people that I totally appreciate and respect, and it's the right thing to do to say you can't talk about things you don't know about. But everybody knew that there were this certain group of people that would do the dirty work for the regime, for the president. Mm-hmm. And you in the commandos, you would have been aware of that too, I presume. I mean, we've heard a lot of evidence that there are certain people that carried out terrible things on behalf of somebody else, right?
Yeah. Like I say, I heard that something has happened, but you don't know who has done it.
And I guess you wouldn't ask questions, no.
But if you put your nose in what they do, maybe you also, tomorrow, you will not be seen.
But you were not yourself in good terms with the authority of the army. Were you not afraid that these guys would come after you?
No. I will tell you that my wife, until now, she is afraid even to come before the camera to say what I'm saying now. She's afraid for me. Yeah, she is a lieutenant to inspector in the police. She's afraid. Mm-hmm. Even now, there are people, they are still fear. But for me, it's time that I remove. I want to be in peace with myself too.
So if we go back to your 5 days in the box, who let you out, or who decided you could get out after those 5 days?
The thing is, just after that, after the 5 days, I was, they took me back to Exile. They told me to gather all my things. That's where I was sent to Barbaron, Ospolit, back to where I started the farm work at Barbaron.
Who owned that farm? Do you know who owned the farm at Barbaron?
Like I say in the beginning, is I was said that it was for Sarah Rene, but I really don't know.
Sarah?
Jeva Rene. Sorry for that.
In your statement, sorry, you said you were tortured. Can you explain a little bit more about that? A part of being in this box, what else happened at that time to you?
Sometimes they come, they take water, dirty water, they throw with you inside. And sometimes you sleep there with water all over the place, and you have to sleep in that water.
And these were your fellow army or commando colleagues that would do this?
If they do not do it, they will also be tortured like this.
Were these boxes used often to put people in? I asked this before, but when you were in the box, was there anyone in any of the other boxes?
At the time I was there, it was only me, but before that there was other people that has been in the box.
Okay, thank you.
Would you have names of your colleagues who were in the box?
I can name one, Mr. Regis Payet.
He was part of a commando as well?
He was a driver there, a good driver.
And what has he done to...
No, maybe I do not recall the what has happened, but he was put in the cell, him also.
You are aware?
It's about 28 years ago. You see, there are many things that even like last night, I have to sit and think back what has happened, what had happened in the time I was there. You see?
You're aware whether Mr. Regis Payet is still alive?
He is alive. He works at security at the English embassy in town.
And so can you tell us when you came out, when they let you out?
Okay.
Can you tell us what happened?
Okay, I was sent to Barbaron. Barbaron, me with another soldier, namely Evans Fanny. There I was sent, I work as agricultural at Barbaron. And I was given a specific job to do, in charge of the cows. There were at about maybe 8 to 10 cows that I had to every day take them out, go and put them in to eat. Clean the place, make sure that the area everywhere is clean. So that was my job. And after that also, they used me mostly to cook when there are people coming to the camp, because I was not a cook as profession, but I can do it. So the thing is, it happened that on the 1st August, that it was nearly 12 o'clock. I was finishing the work, and I saw PMU. I saw police officers in white uniform and soldiers come from the top of where I was working with Ivan Spani, the guy who we together was sent to Barbawa. So there, when I arrived on the top of the camp, so to take something to eat, I was told that, Angelin, when you finish your meal, you're going in the cell. So I just obey. I finish the meal. They locked me up. And at that time, there were
Where was the cell where they locked you?
the cell was at Barbaron,
At Barbaron.
Barbaron Aspolit. Is where the army camp,
Okay.
commandos camp now is.
Which year was it? It was which year? The 1st of August at 12 noon.
1989.
Oh, my apologies. We were meant to actually break at 12. So it might be good to get the second part of your complaint after the lunch break, because I think we've dealt with the first complaint and that you've just started to tell us about the second one.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we'll adjourn now and come back at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry to break
No
your flow,
problem.
but
I have
yeah.
all my time.
Okay, thank you.
All rise.